This video builds on concepts discussed in the coherence principle, so if you're not familiar with it, you might want to watch that video first. Here's a quick recap. The coherence principle states that you should remove extraneous information from your content as much as possible to avoid distracting learners. But sometimes it's hard to avoid all extraneous content, and that's where the signaling principle comes in. The signaling principle states that we should use verbal or visual signaling to guide learners to what's important. Some examples of verbal signaling are summary outlines, headings, pointer words, graphic organizers, and highlighting or emphasizing. A summary outline is a preview statement that's usually placed at or near the beginning of the lesson, like what I did just now when I said, we should use verbal or visual signaling to guide learners to what's important. Another verbal signal is the use of headings to introduce different sections of the content. Pointer words like first, second, third, as a result, helps learners make connections and understand sequences and processes. Giving learners graphic organizers can help them structure information into something meaningful, like a matrix, hierarchy, or flowchart. These organizers can help learners build their mental representations. You can also put emphasis on important words, either by highlighting them in a different color or putting a verbal emphasis in the narration. In a variety of studies done on paper and on screen, researchers studied the effect of verbal signaling. Before I show you a summary of the effect sizes of these studies, it helps to briefly talk about what the effect size tells us. When we want to know whether something we do makes a difference, we sometimes compare two groups of learners. The control group gets the standard set of materials. The experimental group gets the materials presented in a different way. In this group, it's important that the content stays the same and only the variable we want to study changes. The effect size tells us the strength of any effect we see. An effect size of 0.8 or above is considered large. Between that and 0.5 is considered medium, and between 0.5 and 0.2 is considered small. Usually anything greater than 0.4 is considered educationally significant. With that in mind, here's a summary of the effect sizes of these different studies. The most effective verbal signaling came in the form of headings and pointer words. Some uses of graphic organizers were also effective, but only if used sparingly. Putting keywords in red had mixed effects, depending on the age group. It appeared to be more effective in materials presented to college students than with elementary age students. Least effective was when the only signaling came in the form of verbal emphasis in their narration on keywords. But in general, these studies show that verbal signaling, which isn't that difficult to include, does help students learn better. Another type of signaling is visual signaling. Some examples are color coding, arrows, flashing, graying out, coordinated use of auditory and visual cues, and pointing gestures. Color coding involves using color to highlight important parts of the graphic. You can use arrows to draw the learner's attention. You can also make parts of the graphic flash, or gray out parts of the graphic that are not being discussed. Studies comparing groups that were given color-coded materials and those who were not show that color coding had a moderately positive effect on learning. This effect can be further improved with the coordinated use of auditory and visual cues. For example, when the narration puts additional emphasis on what's being discussed and highlighted visually. Another type of visual signaling involves pointing to the important parts of the graphic. Researchers did a number of studies with the use of pedagogical agents, like an animated character who serves as a guide, or an actual person. These studies showed that pointing vaguely to the graphic alone was not particularly effective, but pointing to the specific part of the graphic being discussed yielded significantly better results. So, to summarize, you can see that the most effective use is to point to specific parts of the graphic, ideally with a pedagogical agent or a person, or to use coordinated auditory and visual cues. As an instructor, one challenge you might have in using color to highlight parts of the graphic is that you're finding your images online and those graphics already come in color. So what can you do then? First of all, you should check to see what graphics your presentation application comes with. A lot of them actually come with enough basic images to let you construct your own lesson relatively easily, such as this image on how lightning forms. Just make sure that these images are simple and relevant to the lesson and not overly distracting. If you can't find images in your presentation application, then you can edit the image yourself. Applications like Photoshop or Illustrator can easily work, but even if you don't have access to those tools, you can use applications that are free and available on all platforms. As an example, here's how you can do this using GIMP, a free open source application available on both Windows and Mac. I'll use this heart diagram as an example. Let's say you want to highlight the parts of this diagram in blue that show where the oxygen-poor blood enters the heart from the body to get pumped into the lungs. The easiest way to do that is to use the bucket fill tool, which is this one that looks like a paint bucket. Select that, and then change your active foreground color to gray. Then all you have to do is click on the areas you want to turn gray, and go over any additional sections if you need to. Another way is to use the Select by Color tool, which looks like this. If you can't find it, you might have to go to the Tool menu. Then click on the image to highlight all instances of the same color, and then go to the Color menu, click on Saturation, and drag this bar all the way to the left. And then do the same for the other shades. You might have to clean up additional sections using the Select tool. The Select tool is also great if you have a more complicated image. I'll use this image as an example. First, click on the Select tool. This will allow you to select parts of the graphic freehand, but I suggest using the Scissors tool, which you can get to by just holding down the Select button. The Scissors tool will snap to the image automatically, making it easier to go around curved edges. Then go around the edge like this and select the parts you want to gray out, which would be the red parts in this case. If it doesn't snap to the right edge, you can always adjust it later. Then, once you've highlighted an area, go to the Color menu and adjust the saturation. Then all you have to do is to highlight the other parts you want to gray out. Now, this might seem like a lot of work, but it actually only takes a few minutes, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Also, you're only doing this once for each graphic, so it's not likely something you have to do all the time. There are more and more applications that make graphic design and image editing easier, and it's likely there's already a simpler way to do this. Given the research showing the benefits of the signaling principle, it's worth keeping in mind how these small edits and adjustments to the way you present content can lead to a significant improvement in learning.